Upstate New York hides some of the most chilling abandoned places you'll ever see. Today, I'm taking you inside 5 haunted locations that locals warn you to never visit.
I've always been fascinated by places that hold stories no one talks about. When I first set foot in upstate New York, I never imagined how chilling history could feel. There are abandoned buildings here that were once homes, hospitals, and even prisons, where thousands of real people lived, suffered, and sometimes never left. Walking through these locations, you can feel the weight of their past pressing on you. Tonight, I'm taking you inside 5 haunted places you should never visit. Places that are terrifying, real, and unlike anything you've seen before. Stay with me. If you love exploring real haunted places and uncovering hidden stories, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join me on this journey. 1 Rolling Hills Asylum, East Bethany, New York. I still remember the first time I drove toward Rolling Hills Asylum in East Bethany. The road was quiet, surrounded by open farmland, and nothing about the area prepared me for the weight of the building that slowly appeared in front of me. It didn't look like a typical horror movie location. It looked worse, real, old, and heavy with history. Rolling Hills was first opened in 1827 as the Genesee County Poorhouse. Over the years, it housed the poor, the elderly, orphans, and later people with mental illness. More than 1,700 deaths are documented on the property. Standing there, knowing that number wasn't exaggerated for a story but recorded in county records, changed the way I looked at the building. When I stepped inside during a public investigation tour, the floors creaked under my feet. The paint was peeling, and the long hallways seemed to stretch forever. The guide talked about how bodies were once stored in the basement before burial. I remember forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't there to imagine ghosts. I was there to see what was real. In one of the former patient wards, I stopped walking for a moment. The air felt colder, not freezing, just noticeably different. I checked myself. Old buildings have drafts. Broken windows. Temperature changes. I told myself that. But then I heard something that made me pause. It sounded like a metal door lightly tapping. Not slamming. Just tapping. No one was near me. I walked toward the sound and found one of the old cell-style doors slightly moving. The guide later explained that some of the doors don't sit evenly in their frames. Wind pressure from other parts of the building can cause them to shift. It made sense. And yet, standing there alone in that hallway, logic felt very small compared to the atmosphere. What disturbed me more than any sound was the basement. That's where they say shadow figures are often reported. Historically, the basement was used as a morgue area. When I went down the stairs, I felt something I didn't expect. Not fear, but sadness. Deep sadness. This place wasn't built for horror. It was built during a time when society didn't know how to properly care for vulnerable people. As I walked back outside into the daylight, I realized something important. Rolling Hills doesn't need fake stories. Its documented history, the poorhouse, the asylum years, the confirmed deaths, is heavy enough. The building feels alive not because of dramatic legends, but because real people lived and died there. And honestly, that reality is far more unsettling than any made-up ghost story. 2 Letchworth Village, Thiels, New York. The first time I saw Letchworth Village in Thiels, New York, it did not look haunted. It looked forgotten. The tall brick buildings were standing quietly behind trees, and the grass around them was too calm for a place with such a heavy past. I had read about it before going there, but reading history on a screen is very different from standing in front of it. Letchworth Village opened in 1911 as a residential institution for people with physical and intellectual disabilities. At its peak, more than 4,000 residents lived there. When I learned that number, it shocked me. The campus was originally designed for much fewer people. Overcrowding became a serious issue, and by the mid-20th century, reports of neglect started to surface. In the 1970s, investigations revealed poor living conditions. The facility officially closed in 1996. Knowing all of this, I walked along the public trails that now pass near the abandoned buildings. Some structures have been demolished, but several still stand, sealed and empty. The windows are either boarded up or broken. I remember stopping in front of one building and trying to imagine what daily life looked like here decades ago. Long hallways. Shared rooms. Patients who had nowhere else to go. There is a cemetery on the grounds where many former residents were buried. Some graves were originally marked only with numbers instead of names. That fact stayed with me. These were real people, yet many were almost erased from history. Standing near that cemetery, I felt something that was not fear. It was discomfort. A quiet kind of sadness that stayed in my chest. As I walked closer to one of the abandoned structures, I noticed how silent everything was. No traffic sounds. No voices. Just wind moving through broken window frames. For a moment, I heard what sounded like a distant echo inside the building. It could have been the wind traveling through the empty corridors. That is the logical explanation. But when you are standing there alone, logic feels fragile. I did not see any ghosts. I did not hear screams. But I felt the weight of the past pressing against the present. Letchworth Village does not need exaggerated horror stories. The real history, the overcrowding, the investigations, the forgotten graves, is unsettling enough. When I finally walked back toward my car, I turned around one last time. The buildings were still, almost peaceful. And that was the most disturbing part. A place where thousands once lived now stands completely silent. Not because nothing happened there, but because too much did. 3 Utica State Hospital, Old Main Building, Utica, New York. The first time I saw the old Utica State Hospital building, it did not look like a normal abandoned place. It looked massive, almost endless. The long red brick structure stretched across the hill in Utica, New York, like something built to control everything around it. I remember standing there and thinking, this is not just a building, this is a piece of history that refuses to disappear. Utica State Hospital opened in 1843 and was one of the first state-run psychiatric hospitals in New York. It followed the Kirkbride Plan, which was a design meant to bring light and air into the lives of patients. At the time, it was considered progressive. But as decades passed, the number of patients increased far beyond what the building was designed to handle. Like many institutions of its era, overcrowding became a serious problem. When I walked near the Old Main Building, parts of it were clearly no longer in use, while other sections of the hospital campus were still active under modern care. That contrast made everything feel even stranger. One side represents today. The other side feels trapped in the 1800s. I tried to imagine what life was like for patients here in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Treatments back then were very different from what we understand today. Some methods that were once considered medical progress are now seen as harsh or harmful. Standing there, I felt a quiet tension in the air, not because I believed something supernatural was watching me, but because I knew thousands of real people had passed through those halls. There are stories from locals and paranormal investigators who claim to have seen shadow figures in the windows of the abandoned sections. As I looked up at those same windows, most of them dark and empty, I caught myself staring a little too long. For a split second, I thought I saw movement inside. My heart jumped. Then I realized it was just a reflection of clouds passing across the glass. Still, the feeling did not completely go away. What disturbed me most was not a sound or a shadow. It was the size of the place. The building was designed to separate patients by condition, gender, and level of illness. Long corridors, isolated wings, heavy doors. The architecture itself felt isolating. Even outside, in open air, I felt small compared to it. I did not experience anything I could not explain. No voices. No footsteps behind me. But as I walked back down the hill, I kept thinking about how many stories are locked inside those walls. Stories of suffering, hope, treatment, and survival. Utica State Hospital does not need dramatic ghost tales to feel unsettling. Its real history, stretching back to 1843, is enough to make you pause. And sometimes, knowing the truth is far more haunting than believing in spirits. For Saratoga County Homestead, Saratoga Springs, New York. When I first arrived near the old Saratoga County Homestead in Saratoga Springs, it did not look dramatic or terrifying. It looked quiet, almost hidden behind trees, like a place the world slowly forgot. But the moment I stopped my car and stepped outside, the silence felt different. Not peaceful. Just heavy. The building originally opened in the early 1900s as a tuberculosis sanatorium. Back then, tuberculosis was one of the deadliest diseases in America. Before antibiotics existed, patients were sent to places like this for long-term care. Fresh air and isolation were believed to help. Many people came here hoping to recover. Not all of them left. Later, the property was used as a nursing home before eventually closing. Knowing that the building saw both terminal illness and elderly care made it feel layered with time. Different generations. Different struggles. Same walls. I walked along the outer fence line since parts of the property are restricted. The structure looked worn but still strong. Some windows were dark and empty. Others reflected the sky in a way that almost looked like movement. I kept reminding myself that reflections can play tricks on your eyes. What made the visit unsettling was not a loud noise or a sudden shadow. It was imagining the patients who once spent their final days here. Tuberculosis treatment in the early 1900s often meant isolation from family. Patients would stay for months or even years. I tried to picture someone standing at one of those windows, looking out, wondering if they would ever go home again. At one point, a sudden bang echoed from somewhere inside the structure. My body reacted before my mind did. My heart started racing. I stood still, listening carefully. After a few seconds, I heard the wind picking up. Old buildings shift. Loose metal or wood can move. It was probably just that. Probably. But when you are standing alone near a former sanatorium, probably does not feel very strong. Local paranormal groups have investigated the site over the years, claiming to capture strange sounds and unexplained voices. I cannot confirm those experiences. What I can confirm is the feeling I had walking back to my car. It was not fear of ghosts. It was a deep awareness of history. Places like Saratoga County Homestead are unsettling because they are real. Real patients. Real suffering. Real deaths caused by a disease that once terrified the entire country. The building stands as a reminder of a time when medicine was limited and hope was fragile. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The structure disappeared behind the trees. And for a moment, I felt relief. Not because something chased me, but because sometimes history itself is heavy enough to make you uncomfortable. 5 Bannerman Castle, Polypel Island, Hudson River. I remember the boat ride to Polypel Island more clearly than the island itself. The Hudson River looked calm that day, almost peaceful, and that made it hard to believe that ahead of me stood one of the strangest ruins in upstate New York, Bannerman Castle. As the boat moved closer, the structure slowly came into view. From a distance, it really does look like a medieval castle rising from the middle of the river. But the truth is very different. Bannerman Castle was built in the early 1900s by Francis Bannerman VI, a Scottish immigrant who bought the island in 1900. He used it to store military surplus equipment and ammunition that he sold through his business. That fact alone surprised me. This castle was never a royal home. It was basically a giant storage facility for weapons and explosives. In 1920, a large explosion destroyed part of the complex. Later, a fire in 1969 caused even more damage. Since then, the structure has remained a ruin. Standing there during the guided tour, I could see how unstable parts of it still look. Cracked walls. Missing sections. Open sky where ceilings used to be. The guide explained the history calmly, but I kept thinking about what this place must have been like when it was filled with ammunition. Thousands of weapons stored on a small island in the middle of a river. One accident already proved how dangerous it was. At one point during the tour, I walked slightly behind the group. The wind moved through the broken windows and empty frames, creating a low humming sound. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. But in that moment, it felt eerie. For a second, I understood why some visitors talk about strange feelings here. There are local stories claiming that workers who died during the explosion still haunt the island. Historically, the 1920 explosion did happen, and it caused significant destruction. But there is no verified record of mass mysterious deaths or confirmed hauntings. Still, when you stand inside a crumbling structure that once stored explosives, your imagination does not need much help. The most unsettling part for me was looking out from the castle walls at the river below. Boats passing by. Sunlight reflecting on the water. Everything looked normal. Yet I was standing inside a ruin shaped by explosions and fire. When I left the island, I realized something important. Bannerman Castle feels haunted not because of ghosts, but because of contrast. It looks like a fantasy castle, but its real history is industrial and dangerous. It stands alone, damaged, surrounded by water, cut off from the mainland. And sometimes, isolation is more disturbing than any ghost story.